Hello, everybody. I hope that you're all well and healthy and in good condition. Thank you so much for accessing this e-learning video, which I have prepared for the class para lang makover natin yung mga remaining topics that we failed to discuss during class. So this will focus on understanding communities in social work practice. While you're trying to listen to the lecture, I hope na i-try din ninyong alalahanin yung mga theories that we have discussed in class and also yung mga reports na napakinggan natin during our meetings. Paano nga ba tayo mag-aaral ng isang pamayanan? Pagpunta natin sa isang community, ano yung mga bagay na kailangang pagtuunan natin ng pansin? Pag pumunta tayo sa isang community para pag-aralan ito, ano-ano yung mga aspeto na gusto nating makita? Saan tayo pupunta? Sino yung kakausapin natin? Ang unang bahagi ng lecture na ito, magfo-focus siya sa forms of community assessments. Pag pumunta tayo sa pamayanan, paano ba natin ito pag-aaralan? Ano ba yung focus natin? Ano ba yung scope natin? So, itong part na ito will help us understand and provide us with a framework for studying communities. There are three forms of community assessment at bawat isang to ay itatakal natin in the course of this lecture. These are one assessment typology, which comprises of four categories, as you can see in the slide. Yung pangalawa ay resource assessments at yung pangatlo naman ay collaborative assessments. In the next slides, we will be focusing on the one assessment typology. So one assessment typology, merong iba't ibang pamamaraan ng pag-aaral ng pamayanan. And according to Barbara Spradley, iba-iba yung focus and scope ng pag-aaral natin. Ito yung binanggit ko kanina na apat na categories, which we will be discussing in the next slides. Under one assessment typology, we have what we call the comprehensive assessment. It encompasses the entire community by generating original first-hand data. So it starts off with a very abstract question, tulad ng, how does the community rate in terms of engaging with all of its members? So napaka-abstract niya. This kind of assessment will help planners to come up with programs that are suited to a particular community. If you want to start and introduce a healthcare program, for example, this kind of assessment will give you a comprehensive idea of how to address problems such as health. Still under one assessment typology is the familiarization assessments. Ito yung less thorough study of the community. Ang purpose niya is to just achieve a general understanding of the community. Basically, it uses available data with some first-hand data. Yung ganitong klaseng assessment will help a social worker to acquaint himself or herself with the community and the client concerns. Ito yung kapag naririnig ng social worker yung mga hinaing ng members, mga frustrations nila about basic services. So ito yung pamamaraan kung saan nagiging familiar ang social worker sa pamayanan. Still under one assessment typology, we have the problem-oriented community assessment. So it involves the entire community but only centers on one problem. For example, yung availability of clean water. Gaano ba ito ka-accessible? So this kind of assessment includes analysis of political environment, analysis of communities' readiness to deal with the problem. Nare-recognize ba ng mga tao sa pamayanan yung problema ng kawalan ng tubig o okay lang ba sa kanila? So, yung mga development workers should be able to respond to specific questions like, sino ba yung may pinakamalalang problema sa tubig? Which village should be the first to receive water facility, for example? Ang pinakahuling category under one assessment typology is the subsystem assessments. Alam naman natin na if we go to the community, may iba-ibang subsystems dito. For example, there are those who live in low-cost housing and those who live in posh subdivisions. Sa isang rural community, meron ding mga grupo ng mga fishermen, meron ding grupo ng mga magsasaka. So itong subsystem assessments focuses on a single facet of community life. Isang halimbawa yung public health subsystem. One question which falls under this type of assessment is, how can we introduce COVID response programs based on public health care subsystems in Quezon City? So it's a citywide assessment. And we can also focus on a subsystem. For example, in UP Diliman, as a subset of Quezon City, anong klaseng COVID response ang kailangan dito sa subsystem na ito? Now we are done with the one assessment typology, which has 4 categories: comprehensive assessments, familiarization assessments, problem-oriented, and subsystem assessments. We now move on to resource assessments, which is the second form of community assessment. So what comes to mind when we study the resources of a community? Ang resource assessment ay napakahalaga sa practice ng social work. Sinasagot nito yung mga katatungan such as what actual services are available in the community. Ano ba yung services na ginagamit ng mga tao at bakit? Ang example nito ay public health service. Kung meron kang ino-offer na family planning program, ito ba'y pinupuntahan ng mga miyembro ng community? Baka naman napakalayo nito or hindi siya high quality at hindi siya accessible. So ito yung mga katanungan na mahalaga for understanding the resources available in the community. So itong nasa box includes an inventory of public services and facilities. Meron bang mga nursing homes, hospitals, libraries, community center, law enforcement services? Ano pa yung mga condition ng mga buildings, vehicles, and equipment sa isang community service facility? Baka naman lumang-luma na yung mga equipment sa public health center. And siguro yung condition din and capacity of each service, ito ba'y napakaliit to be able to respond to the needs of the community? So ito yung mga katanungan na sinasagot ng resource assessment. Moving on, we're now done with the one assessment typology and the resource assessments. Now we go to the third form of community assessment, which is the collaborative assessments. What comes to your mind when you hear collaborative? It means involvement, participation, and in this case, collaborative assessment involves participation of communities. Collaborative assessment is a very important and relevant type of understanding community, especially sa community organizing process. Ito yung pag-aaral which can be made in cooperation with community residents or even by the residents alone. If there are existing organizations in the community, pwedeng sila yung mag-conduct ng community assessment. And one good example of collaborative assessment is participatory action research. It is an approach to research in communities that emphasizes participation and action. PAR emphasizes collective inquiry and experimentation grounded in experience and social history. One example of participatory action research, yung ginawa sa Region 10 among vegetable farmers. So nagkaroon ng pag-aaral about specific farming technologies na ginagamit ng mga magsasaka doon. As a result, nagkaroon ng capacity building program, 25 training programs were conducted to help farmers to develop their skills to plant high-value vegetable crop production. Isa rin sa mga naging findings yung fact that local technology should receive more financial marketing support of investors and LGU and continuous technical assistance. Because of this study, there were moves to continue to build the capacity of the farmers, vegetable farmers in Region 10. Now, we have been able to cover the three forms of community assessment, one assessment typology, resource assessments, and the third is the collaborative assessments. Moving on, ano naman yung mga tools in the study of communities? Napag-aralan natin yung forms, pero kapag nasa community tayo, paano natin gagawin yun? These slides will be focusing on important tools in the study of communities. The first tool that I'd like to discuss is the community power structure studies. This is an application of the conflict theory na nireport din sa class natin. So how do you study the power structure in the community? Bakit mahalaga na maintindihan ng isang social worker ang power structure sa isang pamayanan? This is because it will help us identify sino yung nagbibigay ng influence who can affect community decision making. Some key questions that we have to determine is who are in power. Sino yung nag-exert ng influence, posibleng formal position like barangay captain, meron siyang formal na position, that's why he has the power to make decisions. Meron din namang informal na tinatawag na power source sa community. Wala siyang position pero maraming tao ang sumusunod sa kanya. One example would be perhaps the parish priest. Hindi siya binoto ng mga tao, pero he can exert a lot of influence in the community. Pangalawa, who are the economically powerful? Usually, yung may economic power, sila din ang nagkakaroon ng influence sa community. Dahil sila yung nagkocontrol ng resources. And then, of course, meron ding tinatawag na connections. Who have the connections in the community? Sino ba yung malakas kay mayor? And who are the influential? Ito yung mga considerations when we do a community power structure study. Stakeholder analysis is itong napaka-useful na tool sa pag-aaral ng power structure sa isang pamayanan. Ano ba yung stakeholder? Ang stakeholder can be an individual, it can be a group or organization na merong stake or merong interest sa pamayanan. Examples of stakeholders would be non-government organizations, farmers associations. It can also be the government, the barangay captain, or it can be citizens themselves, businesses na merong interest so that he can protect his business interests. So, merong iba't ibang stakeholders which can influence decision making in the community. And it's important to identify who they are and how much influence they can actually exert in the community. At dahil paborito niyo si Mimiya, ginamit ko siya as an example of a stakeholder. Halimbawa, gumawa tayo ng stakeholder analysis for COVID response. And we identified Mimiya as one key stakeholder. So, ano ba yung power niya or ability to change the project? I saw that her Twitter account has 1.6 million followers. So, definitely meron siyang ability to exert influence in the time of COVID. Ano ba yung interest niya? Siya isang entertainer. So, ang interest niya is to maintain her followers and to entertain people. Engagement strategy, the last column that you will see. Nakikita ba natin siyang potential partner sa COVID response? She could be a potential partner, of course, because of her influence. She can actually help the COVID projects to raise awareness about the virus because of her wide number of followers, which also includes a lot of young people like you. Moving on, we are now going to discuss the second tool for studying the community, which is problems and services studies. Similar ito dun sa community assessment model which we discussed earlier. But I think this one will help us understand the steps for studying the problems and services of the community. As mentioned, problems and services studies will help us determine the extent at it will also help us to understand kung gaano kagrabe ang specific problems sa isang pamayanan. So it's basically an overall diagnosis of the range of problems. It also looks at provision and utilization of services. If the problem is about availability of drinking water, as you can see in the photo, then we look at how many water systems are available in the community. Are they of good quality? Are they located near the residents? So these are some of the questions that we'd like to cover when doing the problems and services studies. Moving on, if we focus on the problem of water supply, ito yung mga katanungan when doing problems and services studies. Ano yung population ng community? In coming up with the population, it will help us understand also the number of children, the mothers. These are important information to help us understand how important is the water supply in that community. And then, of course, you have to ask, what are sources of water supply? And then, how accessible are the sources of water? Do they have to walk 3 hours to fetch water? And then, of course, you have to know and determine the quality of water. Kung meron ngang tubig pero hindi naman acceptable ang quality, then it's going to be useless. And then, are there other alternative water sources? Siguro sa kabilang barangay, meron ba silang mas marami at mas magandang water resources doon? Then, these are the things that you have to consider when you do an assessment of this type. Moving on, the third tool for community study is gender analysis. And I'm sure many of you have been exposed to this type of analysis of a community. And this is a direct application of the feminist theories, which we have also discussed in class. Mahalaga ang gender analysis because it helps us ensure that there's equitable participation of women and men in development processes. Kumbaga, hindi lang dapat lalaki ang nakikinabang sa development projects, but it also involves and benefits all the other members of the community, including women. Gender analysis is a useful tool. It is a systematic process, research based on sex disaggregated and gender information. So mahalaga dito yung availability ng information tungkol sa gender na sa mga miyembro ng community. It is also used to identify, understand, and describe gender differences and the relevance of gender roles and power dynamics in the community. So, katulad ng power studies that we have discussed earlier, meron ding power dynamics among gender in a community. This is one example of gender analysis. So, makikita ninyo doon sa column, merong women, men, under access, and then women, men, under control. Yung una is only access, meaning nakakagamit yung miyembro ng pamayanan dito sa isang facility na ito. While yung control, of course, you know, what you mean by control is you have that decision-making role on the use of resources and benefits, for example. So, yung leftmost column shows us resources and benefits. Isang example, yung education and training. Kamusta ba yung access ng women and men sa education? Sa pamayanan, usually priority ng pamilya na mapag-aral ang anak na lalaki. So, dito pa lang meron ng imbalance in terms of gender roles. And then, looking at cash naman, looking at the leftmost column, which says cash, and let's look at the control aspect of cash. Who controls the money resources within a family? Is it the women or the men? So, itong table na to will give us an idea of the power dynamics between men and women in the community. Ang pang-apat na tool na pag-aaralan natin ay yung poverty assessment na napakahalaga at napaka-basic when we want to help a community. Poverty assessment will help us answer the following questions. Unang-una, sino ba yung mga mahihirap sa community? Paano ba natin i-measure yung pagiging poor? And then, where do the poor live? Ano ba yung pamamaraan kung paano tinutulungan ng community ang mahihirap? And then, of course, what is the nature of poverty? Ano yung root cause nito? Ito yung mga katanungan na dapat sinasagot ng isang poverty assessment study. Before moving on, I'd like to discuss poverty indicators. Paano ba natin mini-measure yung poverty? Sino yung mahihirap? Unang-una is yung income or consumption measures. This is based on data which assesses whether an individual or a family or household can afford a basic basket of goods. So meron tayong isang basket of goods to survive. Food, housing, water, transport, and other basic needs. So mini-measure yung ability ng household to buy and afford these basic needs. Ito yung isang indicator ng pag-aaral ng poverty. The next measure of poverty is what we call unsatisfied basic needs index. So this approach classifies households who do not have access to these basic needs. So sino ba yung mga households na walang access sa school, walang pipe water, walang sewage, and then many are illiterate? Ang tawag dito is unsatisfied basic needs index. There are two other types of poverty indicators. One is the asset indicator. Basically, it measures or it surveys the ownership of a family. Meron bang pag-aari na kotse, refrigerator, may TV ba? Ano yung dwelling characteristics? At ano yung access to basic services? Meron bang clean water or electricity yung household? So this is a type of asset indicators which help us measure the poverty level of a family. And then of course we have the vulnerability. This refers to the risk that a household or individual will experience during an episode of health issues as well as natural disasters. So may mga pamilya na nagiging vulnerable during these types of episode. Ang naisip ko dito yung mga tao na nakatira sa typhoon-prone areas, which help or makes them more vulnerable to natural disasters. The fifth tool is the Community Resilience Assessment tool, which is a new type of tool in studying the community. And this has been developed in view of the fact that we have started to experience a lot of disasters, and it's important for development workers to understand whether a community can survive situations of disaster. Community Resilience Assessment is actually developed by the American Red Cross at gumagamit siya ng mga surveys and other data gathering methods na nagfo-focus sa mga critical na components of community resilience. So, gusto nating maintindihan gaano ba resilient ang isang pamayanan in cases of disaster or health emergencies. Ano-ano ba ang characteristics ng isang safe and resilient community? Unang-una, it is knowledgeable and healthy. It has the ability to understand, assess, and monitor resources, risks, and behavior. So meron silang kaalaman kung paano i-manage ang mga potential risks sa pamayanan nila. Pangalawa, it is organized. Communities believe that they have the overall ability to act, to help themselves, to respond to emergency situations and other situational needs. And then of course, it has infrastructure and services. Ang isang resilient community, merong working housing, transport, power, water, and sanitation systems, which minimize their vulnerability. Another measure is economic opportunities. Ang isang resilient na pamayanan has diverse range of employment opportunities so that when emergency situation comes, sustainable yung kanilang sources of income. Also, yung natural assets, marunong silang mag-manage ng natural assets nila. It recognizes the value of natural resources and they have the ability to protect, enhance, and maintain these resources. Ang panghuli naman, ang isang resilient na pamayanan, it is connected. Meron silang community cohesion among members, but meron din silang connection with external actors who provide support and supply services when needed. Siguro looking at these description of safe and resilient community, this will lead us to ask ourselves, gaano ba ka safe and resilient yung pamayanan na kinabibilangan natin? Especially in this time of pandemic, makikita natin na kung gaano kalakas o kahina ang isang pamayanan. So far, we have been able to cover 5 tools for community assessment. But please note that marami pang ibang tools na hindi nakasama dito sa discussion natin. But these are the tools that I feel are very useful in the study of social work. And I hope na nakita ninyo kung paano i-apply yung mga theories na pinag-aralan natin sa class in using these types of tools. If you have questions on any of the topics discussed, please feel free to either send me an email or post your questions and comments on Facebook. So I hope that you found this lecture useful. Thank you very much for listening. I hope that everybody will keep safe and healthy. Thank you.